never where it could follow her. I eye out my kitchen window at the yard Solomon used to tend himself. And for the first time since that wedding, the sting of what Delphine said to me stopped feeling like something separate from everything else. It felt like one piece of a pattern I hadn't let myself see clearly before. Because now that I thought back on it, it wasn't just the wedding. It was the way she'd looked past me at every family gathering leading up to it. Like I wasn't worth a full sentence. It was the comment she'd made at the engagement dinner about people who come from modest means, not always understanding how things are done. It was the way she'd corrected Corwin's manners in front of me once, like I hadn't raised him myself. I'd let all of it go. Told myself it wasn't worth the energy. But small things add up. And apparently I wasn't the only one she'd been treating that way. Dovey, I said it carefully. If people started speaking up officially, filing real complaints, not just talking in the break room, would they? There was a pause on the line. Some of them might, if they thought it would actually matter this time. After we hung up, I sat there a long while, turning her words over the same way I turned over Delphine's whisper 2 nights before. A woman like that doesn't build a pattern of cruelty overnight. She'd been doing this for years, likely to people who had no way to push back. I thought about her name again. Delphine Cole, then, turning it over slowly in my mind the way you do when a word feels heavier than it should. It wasn't unfamiliar. I couldn't place why yet, but it sat in my chest like something I already knew. I found the photograph by accident, tucked inside an old ledger I hadn't opened in years, and my hands went still the second I saw her face. She was younger, maybe 25, standing next to my husband in front of a building that didn't exist anymore. Both of them smiling like people who didn't yet know how far they'd go. I was searching for something else entirely, an old insurance document I needed for the house, when the ledger slipped off the shelf and that photograph slid out onto the floor. I picked it up, turned it over, and there in Solomon's handwriting on the back were 4 words: Delphine's first day. Proud. I sat down right there on the office floor, the photograph in my hand, and let myself remember something I hadn't thought about in over 20 years. Solomon used to talk about a young woman he'd taken a chance on early in his career, sharp, hungry, overlooked by everyone else because she didn't come from the right schools or the right last name. He'd hired her when nobody else would, mentored her himself, stayed late some nights walking her through numbers most people twice her age couldn't read. He used to say she reminded him of himself before he had 2 dimes to rub together. I never met her. Back then, our lives ran on different tracks. Solomon built the company floor by floor. I raised Corwin and kept our home steady, and the people who passed through his working life rarely crossed into mine. He mentioned her by name maybe a handful of times over the years, always with that same quiet pride, the way you speak about someone you helped shape. Delphine Cole, then. I sat with that name a long moment, feeling something settle into place that had been circling me since Dovey's phone call. Not certainty yet, just a weight. Solomon passed 8 years ago now, quietly in his sleep, the way he always said he hoped he would. Everything he'd built, the company, the holdings, the trust that sat quietly behind it all passed to me. I never changed a single name on those papers, never inserted myself into the daily running of anything. I let the people he trusted keep running it exactly the way he'd left it. I only ever asked to be told the truth when something mattered. I hadn't thought about Delphine Cole then in years. Not until 3 days ago, when she leaned into my ear at my son's wedding like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. If it was truly her, the same young woman my husband once stayed late training out of nothing but belief in her, She owed the life she was living now to a man she probably never speaks of anymore. A man who saw something in her before she was anybody, and she didn't even recognize the widow he left behind. I set the photograph down on the desk, face up, and didn't reach for anger. That surprised me more than anything else that day. What I felt instead was quieter than that, something closer to grief for a kindness so completely forgotten it had curdled into contempt for the very family that gave it. This was never going to be about revenge. I understood that clearly now. Sitting there with Solomon's handwriting under my fingers. It was about being seen finally and on my own terms. Percy Ludate has been our family's attorney for almost 20 years. And in all that time I'd never once called him about something like this. I need you to open a formal review, I told him over the phone. Into the CEO of the company, Delphine Colvin. There was a pause on his end. Not shock exactly. Percy didn't shock easily. More like he was recalculating something. Constance, that's a serious step. Talk me through what's prompting it. I told him what Devi had shared carefully, the way she told it to me, without exaggeration. Multiple people expressing concerns about how she treated staff. Pattern, not a single incident. I didn't mention the wedding. Not yet. That's enough to justify opening a preliminary governance review, Percy said. Not because of one conversation, but because if those employees are willing to formally cooperate, the trust requires those concerns to be examined. Executive conduct isn't something the board is allowed to ignore once it's properly raised. I understand. You also understand once we do this formally, it can't stay quiet. She'll have to be told who authorized it. I understand. You don't have to be the one who tells her directly. That's what I'm for. I know that too. He was quiet a moment before speaking again. There's something else you should know before I draft this. Because of the family connection, your son working there, married into her family now, there's a disclosure requirement. Standard practice. If a review touches someone connected by family to the controlling interest, that has to be stated plainly in the notice. No way around it, and honestly no reason to want one. I sat with that. So she'll know it's me. She'll know it's you, Percy confirmed the moment she opens it. He paused again. And before you ask, no. She wasn't expected to know you personally. Since Solomon passed, you've stayed completely outside day-to-day operations. Exactly the way the trust was designed. The board runs the company independently. You only step in when the trust requires the controlling beneficiary to exercise governance authority. This is one of those rare times. I thought of Delphine leaning into my ear at that reception, so sure of herself, so sure I was nobody worth being careful around. I thought of the photograph on my desk. Solomon's handwriting on the back of it. I thought of women crying in break rooms over reports that weren't their fault. Then that's how it should be, I said. Send it exactly as it needs to be sent. Percy read me back the shape of it. Before he wrote a word. The notice of a governance review opened at the direction of the trust's controlling beneficiary, citing documented concerns regarding treatment of staff and conduct inconsistent with company standards. A response window. Her role, her pay, her title. All of it unchanged while the review was underway. Nothing punitive yet. Just a door opening. Slow and formal. You're not trying to end her, Percy said. More observation than question. No, I said. I'm trying to see if she can be honest with herself when she's finally made to look. And if she can't? I looked out at my backyard. at the tree Solomon had planted the year Corwin was born. Then the process will do what it's built to do. That's not on me. That's on her. Percy told me he'd have the letter finalized and sent by morning. I thanked him, and before we hung up, he added one more thing. For what it's worth, Constance, I've known you a long time. You've never once used what you have for something like this. Whatever she did, it must have mattered. I didn't answer that directly. I just told him good night. The letter went out the next morning, carried by a courier to an office building downtown, into hands that had no idea yet whose name sat quietly behind the words she was about to read. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel much of anything, if I'm honest. Just a stillness. The kind that comes right before weather changes. Now all I could do was wait. Corwin showed up at my door that evening. Without calling first, and the second I saw his face, I knew something had happened. You need to sit down for this, he said, stepping past me into the living room, already half laughing in that way people do when something is too strange to process straight. I sat. Corwin, what is it? Delphine called me 20 minutes ago. I've never heard her sound like that in my life. I kept my face still, though my chest had gone tight. Sound like what? Scared, Mama. Not angry. Scared. He shook his head, dropping onto the couch across from me. She said she got some letter today from a law office. Said it was about a review into her conduct at the company. And then she asked me. He stopped, pressing his knuckles against his mouth for a second like he still couldn't believe it himself. Asked you what? She asked if I knew someone named Constance Faulkner. He looked straight at me. I told her that was my mother. The room felt very quiet all of a sudden, even with the television murmuring in the background from where I'd left it on. She went silent for a second. Corwin continued. And then she said, "Your mother did this to me." Just like that. Like she couldn't believe the words coming out of her own mouth. I folded my hands in my lap, the same way I had at that reception 3 days ago, and waited. Then she started talking fast, he said, saying she's worked her whole life for that position. Saying nobody has the right to just show up out of nowhere and take it from her. And then she said, he actually laughed here, short and disbelieving. She said, "Please, can you beg your mother? She has ruined my life." I didn't say anything for a moment. I let that sentence sit in the room the way it deserved to. Beg me? I repeated quietly. That's what she said. Corwin leaned forward, elbows on his knees. And for the first time since he'd walked in, his laughter dropped away into something steadier, something closer to disbelief mixed with respect. Mama, she had no idea. This whole time, she had absolutely no idea who you were. No, I said. She didn't. I laughed at her, he admitted. I couldn't help it. She's on the phone falling apart, and all I could think about was you sitting at that table 3 nights ago, just smiling, not saying a word, while she stood over you talking about how you stink. He shook his head again. I told her, this isn't the end of anything. This is just the beginning. She hasn't even seen what's coming. Corwin, I know. I probably shouldn't have said that. But Mama, she disrespected you at my own wedding. In front of nobody. Thinking nobody would ever know. And she's crying to me now because a letter finally caught up with reality. I looked at my son for a long moment, searching his face for anger. But what I found instead was something closer to protectiveness. The same look he used to get as a boy when other children were unkind to me at school functions, thinking I couldn't see. She knows everything now. I said quietly, more to myself than to him. Everything. Corwin confirmed. And Mama, she's terrified. I sat back against the cushions, my mind already moving past tonight, toward whatever Delphine Cole then would decide to do next now that the ground beneath her had finally shifted. Whatever came next, I understood one thing clearly. This was no longer a secret. Percy called me 2 mornings later and, before he even said hello, I could hear it in the way he exhaled first. She called my office, he said twice. First thing this morning and again about an hour ago. What did she want? Answers mostly. Demanded to know exactly what she was being accused of, who filed what, and whether this was really coming from you or if I was acting on my own. He paused. I told her the notice speaks for itself and that any response to the review needs to go through the proper channel. In writing, within the window we gave her. How did she take that? Not well. She raised her voice, accused me of hiding behind procedure. Then she asked me point blank if this could be stopped if she just apologized to you directly. I sat with that for a moment, looking out at the yard. What did you tell her? I told her that's not how this works. The review isn't about an apology. It's about a documented pattern, and that pattern doesn't disappear because someone says sorry after the fact. Percy's voice stayed even professional, the same tone he probably used with every client who called him rattled. She didn't like hearing that. I imagine she didn't. There was something else, Percy added. Before we ended the call, she said she'd be responding through her attorney instead. That's her right, of course. I told her we'd consider anything properly submitted, just as the process requires. So she's preparing to fight it? Sounds that way. Constance, I want to be clear. She hasn't crossed any line I can act on. She's frustrated, and frankly, people usually are when a process like this starts. I just wanted you to hear it from me before you heard it any other way. I thanked him, and we hung up not long after. I sat there turning his words over, wondering how long her frustration would stay this contained. I didn't have to wonder long. Corwin called me that same evening, his voice tighter than it had been 2 nights before at my kitchen table. She cornered me at the office today, he. Full record yet. Once he does, this conversation changes completely. Sherwood's loyalty isn't going to hold up against what's actually documented. It never does. Augustine let out a small surprised laugh. You really aren't worried? I built patience a long time ago, Augustine. Longer than this company's been standing. A pause isn't the same as a stop. I looked at the photograph still sitting on my desk from weeks before. Solomon's handwriting facing up toward someone carrying something they didn't want to be the one to deliver. I debated whether to even tell you this, she said, settling into the chair across from mine. But I'd rather you hear it from me than piece it together later and wonder why I didn't say anything. Go on. I was at Yvonne's luncheon yesterday. You know how that group talks. She hesitated. Your name came up. Delphine Colvin was there. I didn't know they even knew each other, but apparently they've crossed. So Hard to Protect is the same one that let her humiliate you at my wedding, and then use my name as a weapon when it didn't go the way she wanted. I told her she doesn't get to keep both. The version of herself she wants people to see and the version of herself she actually is. That couldn't have been easy to say to your own mother. It wasn't. Ardelia's eyes glistened, but her voice didn't waver. But it needed saying. I told her if she keeps fighting this, she's going to lose everything with nothing left to hold on to. No severance, no dignity, no story she gets to control. I told her the settlement isn't a punishment. It's the last door being held open for her, and it won't stay open forever. I studied her face, this young woman carrying more weight in one conversation than most people carry in a year. That took courage, Ardelia. I'm not finished, she said. There's something else. I need you to hear it from me directly the way I promised. I waited. I never told my mother I didn't want you near my home, she said, her voice clear and unshaking. Not before the wedding, not after. I want you to hear those exact words from me. Not filtered through anyone else. Whatever she whispered to you that night, it wasn't mine. It never was. I felt sick knowing you might have carried even a small piece of that as something real. Something loosened in my chest hearing her say it plainly, looking me directly in the eye while she did. I believed you the moment you first told me, I said gently. But I understand why you needed to say it again fully like this. I needed you to know I meant it, Ardelia said. Not just that I never said it, but that I would never say it. You've never been anything but kind to me. None of this was ever about how I felt towards you. I reached over and took her hand, and for a moment neither of us said anything else. It didn't need filling. What did your mother say? I finally asked. After you told her all of that? Ardelia let out a slow breath. She got quiet. Really quiet. In a way I haven't seen from her before. And then she asked me for one more day. Said she needed one more night to think clearly before she gave Percy her answer. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of that request settle between us. One more day. Whatever Delphine decided in it would tell us everything about who she'd chosen to become on the other side of all this. Percy called me the following evening, and this time I could hear something settled in his voice before he even said the words. She signed, he said. This afternoon in my office. Augustine was there for the board. It's done. I sat down slowly. Just like that. Not quite just like that, Percy said. She sat across from me for a long moment before she picked up the pen. Read through the terms one more time, even though nothing had changed since the first time I read them to her. I think she needed that last minute to feel like the decision was still hers to make, even though we both knew where it was heading. What did she say once she'd signed? Not much to me. She thanked me for handling it professionally, which surprised me a little. Then she asked if she could speak with Ardelia before she left the building. Ardelia was actually already in the lobby waiting. I learned the rest from Ardelia herself later that night when she called me from her car outside her mother's building. She looked smaller somehow, Ardelia told me. Not physically, just smaller than I've ever seen her. She sat down next to me and didn't say anything for a while. Then she said she kept thinking about something Percy mentioned in passing weeks ago when this whole thing started. Something about how long Bellwood had been quietly involved with the company. And it made her start remembering things she said she'd buried a long time ago. What kind of things? She said she remembered a man who gave her a chance nobody else would. A long time before she was anybody. Said she'd told herself for years that she built everything herself because it was easier than remembering she'd needed help to start. She didn't say Solomon's name outright, but I could tell that's who she meant. I closed my eyes picturing that photograph still sitting on my desk. Delphine's first day. Proud. She said something else too. Ardelia continued, her voice quieter now. She said she used to think humility was something you performed when it was convenient. That she never thought it would actually find her. Not really. Not like this. And then she just sat there a moment before she said the last thing. What did she say? Ardelia was quiet for a beat. Like she wanted to get the words exactly right. She said, I never should have said what I said to her. Not because of what it cost me, because of who she actually was to us, and I didn't even care enough to remember. I sat with that a long moment feeling something in my chest that wasn't triumph. Wasn't even quite relief. Something closer to the quiet ache of watching a person finally arrive somewhere they should have reached years earlier on their own without needing to be walked there by consequence. Is she all right? I asked. I think so, Ardelia said. Different though. Quieter. I don't think this is over for her, not really. Not the reckoning with herself, even if the review part is finished. We talked a little longer. And after we hung up, I sat alone in my kitchen thinking of Solomon's handwriting on the back of that photograph, and a woman who had finally, after everything, remembered the truth she'd spent years choosing to forget. Corwin and Ardelia hosted a small dinner a month later, the first real gathering since the wedding. And when I walked through their door that evening, I wasn't expecting to see Delphine Cole. Then standing near the window with a glass of water in her hand instead of wine. She saw me before I fully crossed the room. For a moment neither of us moved. Constance, she said, setting the glass down carefully. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. Ardelia asked me to, I said. That mattered. The room had gone quieter around us, Corwin near the kitchen doorway, Ardelia just beside her mother, Marva by the table pretending not to watch too closely. Nobody spoke over the silence. Nobody needed to. I've thought about what I'd say to you. If I ever got the chance, Delphine said. I had a version prepared. It doesn't feel right now that you're standing here. Say what's true then, I said gently. That's all I ever needed. She nodded slowly, and for the first time since I'd known of her, I watched Delphine Cole then choose her words without any performance behind them. I said something cruel to you at that wedding, she said. And when it started catching up to me instead of owning it, I made it worse. I told my own daughter things she never said because I needed someone to blame. That wasn't just me. Beside her, Ardelia stepped forward slightly, her voice steady and clear enough for the whole room to hear. I want to say this plainly. In front of everyone, Ardelia said. I never told my mother I didn't want Miss Constance near my home. Not before the wedding, not after, not ever. Whatever she said that night, it never came from me. Corwin moved to stand beside his wife, his hand finding hers, and I watched something in Delphine's face crack open at hearing it stated so openly in a room full of people who now knew exactly where that cruelty had actually originated. I know, Delphine said quietly. I know that now. I knew it then too, if I'm honest. She turned back to me. There's something else. I found out later what your husband did for me. A long time ago, before you and I ever crossed paths. I'd let myself forget it. Convinced. Myself I built everything alone. I didn't even remember his kindness until it was staring back at me through everything I'd lost. Her voice caught slightly. I'm sorry, Constance. Not because of what it cost me professionally. Because of what I owed your family. And I disrespected it without even knowing how much I owed. I looked at her a long moment. This woman who had once been given a chance by a man I loved, who had built a life on that chance and then forgotten where it started, who had stood over me at my son's wedding believing I was someone she could dismiss without consequence. I'm not interested in you living the rest of your life carrying this like a debt, I said. What's done is done. You've made it right where it mattered with your daughter and now with me. That's enough. That's more grace than I gave you, Delphine said softly. Maybe I said. But grace was never something I was withholding to punish you. I simply wasn't going to hand you my dignity for free. You had to earn the room to ask for this conversation. Now that you have, I don't see any reason to keep the door closed. Dinner moved forward not long after that. Warmer than I expected. Lighter than I imagined it could be after everything. I sat back at that table, watching my son laugh with his wife, watching a woman who'd once tried to make me feel small, now finally understanding what she'd stood in front of the whole time. I never needed to raise my voice. I only ever needed to be patient enough to let the truth arrive on its own. Did you like this story? Which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you enjoyed this, support the channel with a super thanks so I can keep bringing you more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next one.